My boyfriend of 3 years had a 4-year-old LD son he never mentioned. I found out when the mom knocked on my door looking for him. What happened in the following hours was the hardest thing of my 29 years. There are moments where reality reorganizes everything you thought was your life in the time it takes for a door to open. Before opening that door, I had a life that in all its visible contours was what I wanted it to be. A shared apartment we had decorated together. A boyfriend named Rodrigo whom I considered the man I was going to marry. 3 years of history I would have described as solid and honest. After opening that door, I had all of that, and also a woman named Sophia who was looking at me with the expression of someone who has just understood they are in the wrong place, and who at the same time cannot leave, because her son needs the father of her son. My name is Elena. I am 29 years old. I am a nurse in the pediatrics area of a public hospital, and I have lived with my boyfriend Rodrigo for 2 years in an apartment we rent together in the neighborhood where we both work. Rodrigo is 32 years old. He is an industrial maintenance technician. We have been together for 3 years. 4 months ago, he had given me a ring that we had not called a formal engagement, because we both preferred to do things without labels, but that both of us understood as what it was. The Sunday someone rang the doorbell. Rodrigo was not home. He had gone out early to run an errand. I was in pajamas with coffee and a series. I opened the door without checking the intercom because I thought it was the neighbor from apartment 4 who sometimes forgot his keys. It was not the neighbor from apartment 4. Sophia was 27 years old. She arrived with a child by the hand. A child of approximately 4 years with Rodrigo's eyes in a way that had no reasonable alternative reading. She asked whether Rodrigo was home. I told her no. I asked her how I could help. She told me she needed to talk to him urgently. That her son, whose name was Mateo, had had an allergic reaction the night before, and that the doctor wanted additional tests, and that she needed the father to be present because there were aspects of the family history she did not have complete. I asked her what her name was. She told me Sophia. I asked her what her relationship with Rodrigo was. She looked at me in a way that told me she was processing something about my question that I was not yet processing. She told me she was the mother of his son. What followed in the next 5 minutes, I am going to describe with the honesty of someone who has medical training and who, even with that training, had to make a specific effort not to let what she was feeling in her body show completely on her face. I told Sophia to wait a moment. I closed the door, not hostilely, with the calm of someone who needs 30 seconds before being able to continue. I stayed in the hallway of the apartment during those 30 seconds. Then I opened the door again. I asked Sophia to come in. I offered her a seat. I told her Rodrigo would arrive at some point, and that in the meantime we could talk. The conversation with Sophia lasted 40 minutes. It was the strangest conversation of my life. 2 women in the living room of an apartment that one of them shares with the father of the other son. One of them with information the other needed, and neither of them completely sure how much the other knew. The first thing Sophia told me, when she understood that I genuinely knew nothing about Mateo's existence, was that she was sorry, that she had assumed Rodrigo had told me, that it had not been her intention to appear this way. I told her it was not her fault, that what was happening was not a problem between her and me, and that right now what mattered was the child. I asked her about the allergic reaction. She spoke to me like someone talking to a healthcare professional. I asked her questions that were the right questions given the picture she described. That helped me, having something technical to do while I processed what I was processing. Rodrigo arrived 45 minutes after Sophia had rung the bell. He opened the door with his key. He saw us in the living room, and what I saw on his face in that moment was the answer to the question I had not yet formulated out loud, but that my body already knew. It was not surprise. It was the recognition of someone who sees that something they have been avoiding for a long time can no longer be avoided. I told Sophia she could talk to Rodrigo, that I would be in the bedroom if they needed anything. I went to the bedroom. I closed the door, and I sat on the bed that Rodrigo and I shared and stayed there for the duration of that conversation in the living room. I did not cry yet. The kind of impact I was processing did not produce tears immediately. It produced a kind of cold clarity that I see in patients and that I recognized in myself. Sophia left after 20 minutes. Rodrigo knocked on the bedroom door. I told him he could come in. He sat on the bed beside me, and what followed was the conversation I needed to have, even though there was no way I could have been ready for it. I asked him whether he had a son. He told me yes. I asked him how long he had known. He told me since before he met me. Mateo had been born when Rodrigo was 28 years old, from a relationship that had ended before Rodrigo and I met. I asked him why he had not told me. What Rodrigo told me, next I'm going to recount, because it is important for understanding what followed. He did not give me an elaborate justification. He told me he had been scared, that when we started dating, he had thought it was too soon to tell me, that when the relationship became more serious, the time that had passed without telling me made the conversation harder, that every time he had wanted to say it, he had found a reason to postpone it, that with the ring he had thought it was the moment, but had not found it either, that he had no explanation that sounded good because there was not one, that he had simply been afraid of losing me. I asked him what relationship he had with Mateo. He told me he saw him every 2 weeks, that the Sundays I thought he had soccer with friends were the Sundays he spent with his son, that arrived in a specific way the rest had not yet. Not only the secret, the soccer Sundays. 3 years of soccer Sundays that were something else. I told him I needed him to leave that night, that I needed to be alone, that I was not making any decision at that moment, but that I could not be in the same space as him while I processed what I had just learned. Rodrigo went to a friend's house. I stayed in the apartment, and that night was one of the longest I can remember. I called my best friend Daniela. I told her what had happened. Daniela was at my apartment in 40 minutes. She did not tell me to leave him. She did not tell me to stay. She listened. She let me process out loud everything I needed to process. That was what I needed that night. Not advice. Presence. What I processed in the following days was more complicated than I expected it to be. Not because I did not know what I felt, but because what I felt was not simple. There was anger. Specific anger about the soccer Sundays. About 3 years of a part of his life that had existed in parallel to ours without my knowing. About the times he had had the opportunity to tell me and had not. There was also something harder to name. The image of a 4-year-old boy who had Rodrigo's eyes, who had not chosen to have a father, who concealed his existence, who was completely unrelated to everything happening in that apartment. And there was the question that cost me most to ask myself. What did I want? Not in terms of what was right or what people would expect of me, in terms of what I genuinely wanted. That question took me 2 weeks of honest processing before I could answer it clearly. I talked to Rodrigo several times in those 2 weeks, not to immediately rebuild, to understand, to ask him the questions I needed answered. What his relationship with Mateo was like, what role he wanted Mateo to have in his life long term, whether there was anything else he had not told me. The answers to those questions mattered, not because they justified what he had done, but because they gave me the information I needed to make my own decision from a place of clarity and not reaction. I ended the relationship with Rodrigo, not because having a child was a problem in itself, but because what he had done with that secret over 3 years told me something about how Rodrigo handled difficult things. That when something scared him, he postponed it. That he postponed it long enough for it to become 3 years of invented Sundays and a part of his life he had lived alone. That it was not the first big fear he had had in our relationship, and that in the previous ones he had also found a way not to say it directly. That pattern, more than a specific secret, was what determined my decision. I could not build a marriage with someone whose mechanism in the face of difficulty was silence. Not for lack of love, for lack of the foundation that a relationship of that level requires. What I want to take from this story has parts for different people. For those who recognize themselves in Elena's position, when you discover something like this, the first impulse is to make an immediate decision. Stay or leave. Forgive or not forgive. That impulse is understandable. And it almost always produces a decision that comes from the sharpest place of pain and not from the clearest place of what you truly want. Giving yourself the time you need to process before deciding is not weakness. It is what makes the decision you make genuinely yours. For those who recognize themselves in Rodrigo's position, the secrets we keep out of fear do not protect relationships. They erode them. Because every day that passes without saying something important is a day the relationship exists on an incomplete foundation. And when the truth arrives, which it always does, The distance between what something was and what it seemed to be becomes the real harm, more than the truth itself, the time that passed without it. If this story reached you, comment. Do you believe there are secrets of this magnitude that can be forgiven within a relationship, or is a 3-year omission itself irreparable? Like if you believe fear of losing someone does not justify hiding information that directly affects the decisions that person makes about their own life. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who is processing a trust betrayal in their relationship and who needs to know that taking time to decide is valid. Reflection to take with you. The most important decision you make after discovering something like this is not whether to stay or leave. It is what information you need to make that decision from the clearest possible place. That information requires questions. Questions require conversations. And conversations require that you not make the decision before having them.